All right, and the recording is going.
All right, Jacob, you want to go first? Looks like you have the
Sure.
first thing.
Yeah, let me present. Yeah, so this is an RC that we are presenting. It's based on a reference design that Aspen Mesh has done for Istio 1.9 and Istio 1.11. We previously received feedback from John. This was, I think July of last year, just to see if the the overall direction was kind of kind of something that he would approve of in the future. I don't want to speak for him, kind of in that regards, but uh, there's a lot of information in this document, and as far as what the current behavior of dual stack is within Istio. So for a little bit of background, this is a now stable feature in Kubernetes. Yeah, there's a couple configurable things that people have to do to opt in to get dual stack behavior, but it's no longer behind a feature gate. And at least more of our customers are asking about support for dual stack networking. We have IPv4 only support, and there's IPv6 only support. So yeah, so as an effort that we've undertaken, we've got this working. The big call outs. So this is a lengthy document, and it could consume the entire time of this meeting, right? I'm not going to really ask people to review this as part of this meeting. This is more of a what are some of the high level changes for this, as well as please review this offline, and then we'll talk about it at a future meeting. If there's any other comments, hopefully everything can be addressed kind of as comments are going up rather than kind of taking up meeting time. Right. So yeah, so we give a little bit of behavior, and as far as like what the current status is of Istio, if you try to install it on a dual stack cluster, this isn't supported. So obviously, like things are going to be broken. But the big call out that I want to make is that if we are supporting dual stack services, and let me zoom in here. The big call out here is that in order to get this working, at least as we see fit, is if a client is actually requesting or is making a request over IPv4, right? So they get the virtual IP of a service, and they get an IPv4 address, or they get an IPv6 address. As it flows from the client and it flows into the actual server application, everything should be done over those appropriate protocols. And in order to do that, unfortunately, we had to double the XCS footprint, right? So in this particular example, we have a reviews service pod that has a virtual IP, 1040.0.17 and 2001, etc. Product page does resolve the IP. From here, it makes an IPv6 request. Let's just say it goes over the IPv6 virtual outbound listener that we have created in addition to the IPv4 one. From there, it gets routed to the appropriate listener. It does a match. It goes through routes. It goes through a new cluster, Outbound 6 cluster, which is actually associated with the endpoints, associated with the pod endpoint of that particular service. So I just wanted to make this clear so that as we start putting up PRs for this, that people are aware of like why there has been at least a doubling of this. John.
Yeah, I was wondering in Kubernetes in general, not necessarily with Istio, does calling the IPv6 cluster IP imply that you should only call IPv6 pod IPs?
maybe Yingcheng has a better answer for this. But the routing is set up completely independently, in as far as I recall. So I think qproxy sets up IP6 tables rules kind of for that. So yeah, so if you make a call over IPv6, it gets routed through IPv6 internally.
Okay, and does every pod have both IP addresses?
So it's going to depend on how your networking is set up. So you when you create a service in a dual stack cluster, you don't have to actually specify these new fields, IP families and IP family policy. These are new fields, and actually there's issues with the new fields too. So if you want to change, say, HTTP bin into being an IPv6 or sorry, a dual stack service, you actually have to delete the service. Like it's considered immutable.
But
so
that's the service IP, right? I'm talking about the pod IP. Like, I'm wondering what the correlation between service IP family and pod IP family is, and if those can mix, if every pod is dual stack, and like how that works, especially when you can take into account multiple clusters. Like, if I have one IPv4 cluster and one dual stack cluster, and I call the IPv6 service IP, can I load balance to the other cluster that only has IPv4 pods, or do I have to exclude all those because they called IPv6? Things like that.
So, John, you're asking about the behavior current implementation of Kubernetes with a specific CNI plugin, or about specification? I mean, I don't think they have any specifications that says that you must do or it will only go to IPv4 addresses for one cluster.
Yeah, I would say I'm looking for a specification if it exists, and if not, then what the prior art is, and if they did the right thing.
prior art, I mean, at least in Istio, where we support VMs and we support not only Kubernetes, we are not bound by Kubernetes limitation or rules, because in reality, you can have a VM. Once you have a VM, it implies that the VM can have an IPv4 address, can have an IPv6 address, and we should be able to load balance across them. So I think we should have a very strong stance that when you call a service, you load balance across both IPv4 and IPv6. Because otherwise it's, will break a lot of other things. Do you agree? I mean,
I think I agree, but it can be tricky when like one single workload has both IPs, right? And you could probably favor the one they used or something. I'm sure there's a right answer, but we should write explicitly what it does and how it compares to other CNIs and things like that.
What it does and what Istio behavior will be, because we are a mesh, we overlay on top of the existing network, so we can do what I've seen a lot of mesh networks that just assign one IPv6 to everyone and use IPv6 as a deep or kind of a overlay IP, and then that can be mapped to IPv4, IPv6, or some tunneling protocols that are in between, and that's something we need to consider about to also avoid doubling the stack, because we have DNS interception, we have a lot of other features. We could say that service is resolved to a single address, which can be IPv6, and then we have a single. We don't have to copy it twice.
Yeah. John, to get back to your question though about pod IPs, the pod actually does get both an IPv4 and an IPv6, like always. It's only that the routing with service IPs is actually changed when the service definition is changed.
Right.
So
but they may not listen on both IPs, right? Which makes
that is correct. That is correct. So like you can still have an IPv4 only service or an IPv6 only service in your environment, even though you have both pod IPs.
And
that's Kubernetes,
check,
right?
And health checks would probably address it. So it's not it's a different problem about which one is alive, which one is not alive. But you are talking about a single cluster. But if you have a mesh with multiple clusters, some cluster v4, some cluster v6, and some cluster dual stack, the endpoint set across clusters will be a mix of v4, v6, and dual. In Istio, I mean, Istio requirements are different than single Kubernetes cluster requirement.
Cecilia?
Hi, I just wanted to ask if we have already considered how upgrade will be supported in this case, like from a v4 only lane to 12 stack or.
Yeah. So we have documentation ourselves for how our customers actually kind of need to do this. And so as part of this effort, yes, like we would have to document Kubernetes. I don't believe you can do it in place. With OpenShift, it's just a few commands with like OpenShift 4.9 and higher. But as far as Istio, I think you have to do like a rolling Kubernetes restart. It's a little bit more drastic if people are trying to go from an IPv4 only cluster. I mean, at least from what I've seen, at least with Kubernetes, not OpenShift, it may want to be like hopefully you've treated your cluster as a cattle, and can kind of just rebuild that easily.
Okay, I have seen that there are considerable differences between this dual stack implementation in Kubernetes in version 1.18 and 1.20. So that's why I asked.
Yeah, and that's actually why up here we actually call out like a couple of things. One, so one's stable in 1.23. So either we support, in my opinion, 1.23 or higher, or 1.22 and higher, but probably not anything further than that. It actually goes back all the way to 1.16, but that was considered alpha. And then from alpha, I think, they went to beta, I think in 1.18 or 1.19. I can't remember exactly when. And then it went from, beta from that time period to stable. So, given that this is going to be at least, what we're calling is an experimental feature, that the user is going to have to opt in, it would be nice to be able to build off of a stable networking CNI within Kubernetes.
So I want to reach a conclusion on the endpoints being mix of IPv4 and IPv6. I don't see any alternative to allowing that, and I would really like to have a clear statement that this will be the case, so we are not confused later. And also to separate the two problems. I mean, the problem of having a mix of IPv4, v6, and dual in the endpoint pool should be the P0 and the things that we need to deliver at stable as soon as possible. Because again, forget about Kubernetes. You have a VM that is IPv6 only, or you have a VM that is dual stack. It needs to be supported. We claim to support VMs, so having endpoints, even with services being IPv4 only. And I want to decouple the problem of supporting dual stack for service IPs, VIPs basically, because you can have IPv4 VIPs, which load balance to IPv6 endpoints without any problem. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, because that will avoid doubling the size of XDS, which is already too large to handle.
Okay. I mean, we'll have to talk more about that. Yeah, like please add some more discussions in as far as like what are things. Yes, because we're also working with Envoy, the Envoy community to get this kind of better support for multiple addresses as well. So that we don't have to reduce this, right? So at least in the first phase,
but we can wait. I mean, we can support service VIPs IPv4 only. And since we control DNS, we can make sure that it resolves to IPv4 always. And until Envoy supports better, XDS, not bloated XDS, and then we can start support for it. It doesn't have to be everything at once. We can easily add IPv6 support on endpoints today, without changing the XDS, without changing almost anything else, and get it to stable basically in terms of testing and everything else, because it's a relatively small problem. Anyone disagrees or believes that it's a high priority to have dual IPv6 for VIPs?
So if I understand you correctly, so you are talking about with the multiple IP address in the endpoints, we specify that. Is that correct?
Yes, the EDS will return a mix of IPv4 and IPv6.
So the problem for that is basically I mixed of IP family. So if I can come back with any of the IP families, there's a mix for you basically. I can go to IPv4 or IPv6 address for that, right?
Yes,
and it's a balance between.
Yes. So you have a VM that is IPv6 only. You have a VM that is IPv4 only. Half traffic goes to IPv6 VM. Half traffic goes to the IPv4 VM.
So initially, when we designed this, we talk about this, the possibility for that. But the decision we made to choose is we want to strict on IPv4 going to IPv4 traffic and IPv6 going to IPv6 traffic. So it's just for the security reason, instead of balancing between the two. If one of them doesn't work, then we'll lose half of the traffic.
I'm not sure I understand the concerns here. I mean, that's reality. You have users have clusters that are IPv4 only. They have VMs and all kind of environments that are IPv6. So we cannot control and dictate that it must be IPv6 and IPv4. And you don't want to lose half of the capacity for the service just because I mean, what would be the
Is it will be better to be make more clear to when we do a demo for that?
Sure, but the requirement, I'm concerned about the requirements and what is the intended behavior, not. By the way, it is quite common on the internet. I mean, IPv4 mapping IPv4 addresses to IPv6 is quite common. So it's not really we're not talking about something new here. You can represent all IPv4 through the the specific range that is mapping v4 to v6.
Okay. Yeah, let's take. I think there's still some more discussion to be had there. Let's kind of take this. Again, like we're already 24 minutes deep, right? But yeah, you are right. Like you can do IPv4 mapped on IPv6 addressing. That is something that is done. We'll have to clarify some of the reasons why probably in this doc. So yeah, so hopefully we can make the case for what it is that we're trying to do, but at the same time, I do know that there are concerns. So yeah, like let's try to resolve this within the document after this meeting, or side discussions with us, Costin. I do understand your concerns though. Anyway, so yeah, so for environments, sorry, I guess the thing for environments is that we're proposing, just environmental support, or sorry, environmental variable kind of opt-in. I know that we don't want to use environmental variables kind of long-term. The reason being, like, this would be considered experimental, and then probably in the next release or the release after, it depends on kind of how the integration testing is coming along. Yes, we actually want to auto detect it, right? And so we want to be able to actually do some more determination and say, okay, yes, we're in a dual stack environment. We have dual stack services. We have a mix of services, et cetera, and actually just have it kind of work similar to what IPv6 only, does right now, right? So yeah, so that's kind of why we are not proposing a change to API, but actually a change to like long-term kind of auto detection, and that's the thing for environmental support, or sorry, environments. Again, I go through here, I list all the changes down here. Like you can actually see an example as well. I go through of like, here's here's a test setup, and then I provide a config dump with at least a working implementation of this, and then some of the limitations, and then other things that we're working on within Envoy, right? Which you actually did address, right? So yeah, there is memory consumption and usage issues, at least with this approach. There's also like load balancing. There's waiting issues. There's other concerns, especially as you get into more advanced use cases, right? Like VMs, multi-clusters, right? That all kind of need to be addressed. But kind of before I do that, Ying Chung, do you just want to give a demo real quick of what it is that we do have?
Yeah, sure. Can you see my share?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I just do I just show I create there as three namespaces. Basically, I have one is IPv6 only for the services, and you can see my endpoints as IPv6 only, and then I have the IPv4 one. The service is only IPv4, and I have a dual stack one. It has both IPv4 and IPv6 service, and it has different endpoints for that. So I can do a check, say, like I can do the traffic going through each one of them. So as I said, in this case, we IPv4 going to IPv4 address and IPv6 go to IPv6. We don't mix the traffic between. So this is the case, like I'm going to the dual stack cluster, and I can use IPv4 one, or I can use the IPv6 one. The service we actually create ourselves that you can print out what the remote address is, so you can see what it is. And also you can see from here is what address it try to reach to. So if I'm doing the IPv6 one, you can see the IPv6 address it's trying to connect to, and the remote address is from the IPv6 as well. Similar thing, I can go through any of the IPv4 or IPv6 address. So if I'm going to just IPv6 one, that's the part I only have the IPv6 one. So it will go into IPv6 address for that. So this is basically the traffic is between mixed IPv4, IPv6 or dual. It all should work with the way it was set up for that. I can do a quick take a look at for different components for that. If I'm just grab the cluster for it, and you can see I have all by inbound, because this is my dual stack, and I have by inbound has two of them. I have inbound for normal IPv4 one and IPv6 one. We do that inbound 6 for that. Then you can see I have the cluster going to different places. Only in the case if the service has dual stack, we have another one is called the Outbound 6 going to IPv6 address. In the case of the IPv4 only or IPv6 only service, the cluster only has one outbound services. So this is still using the original the traffic, the name conventions, just outbound something with the for the cluster. And if I can take a look at the similar thing, I can take a look at the listener. And you can see I have the inbound cluster with this, and for the IPv6 is the inbound 6 for that. Route is a little bit different in a way that route is, because it is a dual stack cluster, which means I have each of the pod I have all the IPv4 and IPv6 address. So even in the case of I have IPv4 v6 only service, the route I still use that appending the IPv6 for that, because just indicates it's the IPv4 v6 address for the routes for it. Anything else you want to see about this, or any questions for that?
Yeah, config dump would be nice. Not putting the doc maybe at the end.
Yeah, yeah, we can create. We can have a dump for that. Yes.
The dump is attached, or like not for this particular example, but there is a dump in the RFC
Okay,
as well. Yeah. Here I'm gonna go back to this really quickly. Constant, and as far as things like IPv4 Combat, which I know that John addressed, Envoy's had some numerous issues with like IPv4 Combat, and some of the behavior was kind of tricky. And as far as like when we were testing things, again, because we did look at like, colon with IPv4 Combat set to true, and like what exactly happens.
Jacob, just an example. I mean, I'm not saying we should use it.
Sure.
Eventually should fix the bug, but long term, I think the long term goal should be to, by default, to support arbitrary endpoints with whatever it is, assuming we fix all the bugs. I mean, I'm not saying now or.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's this. I think the reason why we're bringing this here is that, so we've got this to work with a single cluster, right? Like that was the requirement that was kind of given to us from our customer. But kind of long-term speaking, yes, like there's actually a lot of concerns around this. I'm going to have Kenan talk a little bit more about this, but the first phase would just be like, can we actually get this working within a single cluster? right? And then just say, hey, this is experimental, it's not supported, and these like hybrid, cluster organizations, and then actually like, what is the step for us to actually start figuring out what should the routing be for alpha, for beta, for VMs, for multi-clusters, right? Like, I mean, multi-cluster and VMs are going to present so many other issues. And as far as like, yes, can this actually work well with all of the other features that Istio does have? Sorry, like, let me look at your comment. Yeah, that's something that we can address here, hopefully, kind of in the RFC, and come to a better agreement. The one thing is, Kenan, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Kenan, do you want to just speak to a little bit in as far as like the integration test suite stuff that you're going to be working on?
Yeah. So, so we're basically going to try to be integrating or pulling over so that we can have initial steps of like being supporting of dual stack, and then going into introducing test suites for IPv6 only, IPv4 only, dual stack with preference for IPv6, dual stack with preference for IPv4, and then sorry, I'm just making sure. And then basically once we have the RFC approval, or if we get the approval, then we'll be starting to introduce validation tests for listener, routes, cluster, endpoints, as well as doing post-submit and pre-submit jobs so that we can make sure that the dual stack environment is behaving appropriately. Of course, we also are looking at probably doing hidden or optional tests for at least pre-submit jobs so that dual stack doesn't hold up other things as we start migrating or pulling over dual stack code and getting that all set up.
Okay, and that's our half. Iris and Steve Zhang are kind of our cohorts, our colleagues at Intel that are kind of working the single. We also have somebody from their team that is kind of looking at Envoy changes. Again, like, this is still an RFC. We're still in the initial inception for what will be done for open source. And as far as, yes, if this diverges from what AspenMesh has done for 1.9 and 1.11, I'm hoping we can come to an agreement fairly soon here. Obviously, there's still a lot of things. This is a big document. Please take a look at this. I'm sure there's going to be many concerns. But yeah, hopefully we can get to it and address them soon. So thank you guys for your time. Do you guys have any questions though before we kind of hand it off to somebody else? Because I know there's a lot more on the agenda.
All right.
I'll take over, Mitch, if that's all right. I think I'm up next.
Yeah, go for it, John.
One thing also, while I share this, we should probably not categorize it by working group, because then networking's at the top, so we get all the topics first. But I just note. Anyhow, so what I want to talk about is some changes to kind of how we do outbound traffic matching. This probably has some overlap with IPv6, to be honest. But the motivation is that probably everyone here knows that you can't really just drop Istio in place in a big cluster and expect everything to work. There's a lot of different reasons for that. Some of them are things like lifecycle issues where, we like break and knit containers. We do all sorts of funky things with startup and shutdown. That I think we're working on in other places. This doc doesn't help with that. But the other case is kind of things we do with traffic that are not expected. So this is things like, my traffic used to go here and now it goes here instead with Istio, or it used to work and now it 404s, things like that. So some of this is intentional, like we do HTTP load balancing, which is just what Istio does. And, that's a feature, not a bug. But some of it I think is unintentional because of decisions we made in the past that kind of diverge from the behavior you get without Istio, without adding value, and just adding, issues for people adopting. So this document basically aims to address those cases where, everything that we made not work we should make work as much as possible. So the biggest of these, I think, is supporting calls to pod IPs directly. So this is pretty common in some applications, like Prometheus would be a good example. Currently, that's pretty much broken in Istio today. And along the way, there's also a bunch of other edge cases that I'll get into. I won't get into it too deep because I don't think I have enough time. I could probably talk about this for an hour, but I'll go over kind of a high-level overview. So on here, I won't get into this, but I kind of mapped out the logic that we have today, which, as you can see, it's quite complicated. But I'll skip over that for now. Basically, the main issues, like I mentioned, pod IP doesn't work. We get kind of inconsistent behavior if you do something like this. This is obviously the request wouldn't really look like this in most applications, but similar occurrences do happen. Because we route based on host header, we kind of get a bunch of weird behavior that doesn't align with Kubernetes. And I also noticed it's not what Linkerd does either, just as another data point. We have some other issues like we do for headless services, like we need to support pod IPs, otherwise they're completely broken. But the way we implemented it is so expensive that we saw one user that just had one daemon set and it caused 10 megabytes of XDS config, which is obviously just not scalable. So yeah, there's some more. I can go into depth on these, but I don't want to spend too much time here. So I'll talk about kind of the changes, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how I can explain this in like 10 minutes. So yeah, go ahead, Carlson.
So I completely agree with most points in this document and most of the solutions.
Yeah.
But one thing we discussed in the past, and I want to make sure the group is aware of and understands the trade-offs. We are also still working on the H-bond proposals or better transport security that was presented 1 or 2 years ago. And we are making slow progress because there is a lot of testing, a lot of envoy changes. And when this land, it will also solve a lot of those problems and kind of impact it. And we may want to make a choice about which problems we prioritize from this list, because not all of them need to be done at once, I suspect. And which ones we just focus more on the H1 and address them with the H1 solution. Because that's a point where we can make some breaking changes and we can change a bit behavior in a kind of expected way, like kind of Istio 2.0 or something. It may be an easier and safer migration when we migrate to H1 to also, because everything you describe here is a behavior change that will probably break someone accidentally. So we need to be careful with the trade-offs, basically. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this will be one of the hardest migration problems that we'll have to solve that we've done. I think it's worth it. And so far, my goal has been to kind of define here what I think is the ideal behavior. And then once we do that, we can figure out how we can actually implement this in Envoy, which I don't think is trivial today. I think it will require Envoy changes, and then how we can actually migrate there. And that may mean cutting some of these things.
What I meant, maybe do this when in the H1 implementation. So we'll have at some point a switch where we migrate to H1. That's unavoidable. So maybe implement the new features in the H1 logic, start pushing some of the H1 changes so with a new behavior, and people will opt in or opt out of those features by switching to H1. So when they move to H1, they get the new behaviors, the correct behavior. If they want the backward compatibility, they stay with the existing implementation. That's my proposal, basically.
Yeah, one thing I would note is that this, we can couple it just as a means of, two breaking changes coupled together, but they are technically unrelated.
They're not unrelated. I mean, the H1 behavior is what you described here, which is a correct behavior. Istio backward compatible behavior and what people expect is what we have today. As bad as it is, that's.
I mean, this is this is about matching where we should send it to. It doesn't.
Yeah, I agree.
How?
A mix of the. But I don't want to have 3 migration to break people every.
No, I totally agree. I think it's a good idea. I'm just saying. I just want to make clear for everyone else that these are technically decoupled, and we could choose to couple them as a means to have one migration rather than 2. Yeah. So I guess what I'm after, because I can't go too in depth in this amount of time, is people to look at feedback on the routing logic, the new routing logic, and see if that is actually the ideal Istio behavior. And I guess 2 is, if this is even something we should do, is it worth the type of migration pains and that sort of thing? Once I get some feedback on that, I'll start thinking on how we can actually implement this and what the migration path will be, etc. Yeah, I guess, is there any feedback already? It may just be something we review offline. I just wanted to bring it to everyone's attention.
Yeah, sorry, we need time to digest this, John, not to ignore you.
No, that's what I expected. Cool. So yeah, please take a look at it. I'll put it on the agenda again for next week or 2 weeks or so, and then we can discuss it there. And obviously, feel free to put as many comments on there and stuff. And if it's not clear, please ask questions. It's hard to condense our extremely complicated logic into one doc, but hopefully it's understandable. Cool. I will close this out then. Yeah, my next 2 I have also on the list. I think it's the same kind of thing. Just would be good to get some more eyes on these changes. I think one of them I need to go out a lot more info, so I don't know. Maybe it was premature at putting there, but there's another PR that's not from me that's making a fairly substantial change that I think it's good, but it's kind of a very risky change. So I want basically everyone to look at it if possible, especially the dual stack folks, since it may impact you. So yeah, please take a look at those, and whoever's next on the list, feel free to go.
It's you. You actually have some pull requests.
Oh yeah, that's what I was talking about. Those 2 pull requests,
okay.
like those, I don't think there's much to talk about, but especially the second one would be very good to get other eyes on it, especially people that are working on dual stack and that are familiar with edge cases. I don't know. Like the PR looks fine to me, but it's just the kind of thing that I can't imagine it won't break someone somehow in some obscure way. So.
Yeah, I don't know who what the GitHub ID is for the next user.
Yeah, is this person here?
Yeah, add namespace selectors. I'm going to say no. So next would be Tong. Who I thought was here.
He is here.
Not on mute, but I don't hear you.
Maybe move to the next topic until he fixes the mic.
I think all of the remaining ones are ones that he brought up, 2 environments.
Hello? Hello?
Oh, I hear you now.
Oh,
Go ahead, Tom.
I don't know. Everything was working before. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. The first issue actually is about the document that we talked about this in the last environment working group meeting. And I find that we actually have this document talk about upgrade and downgrade, all that kind of stuff. But last time we said the downgrade or rollback actually is not safe. And I also find that there are actually a lot of issues opened because the people follow document do the upgrade, use the upgrade command. I wonder if we should revisit this section and not to kind of say, hey, do the downgrade this way or do the upgrade this way. We should just say, okay, go ahead and use the still install for your upgrade, and for downgrade, we're not really supporting that.
To clarify, we only said that downgrade is not safe from one version to the previous one.
Right.
But rollback is always supported.
Excuse me?
So rollback is different from downgrade. Rollback means that I have 1.11, I upgrade to 1.12, something is wrong, and I return immediately to 1.11. That's rollback. Meaning that in between, users do not use any of the 1.12 features. It's just, so admin is starting the process, it finds something wrong, reverts to 1.11. The problem starts after you upgrade to 1.12. People start using 1.12 features, and then we cannot go back because we don't know what will happen.
So I mean, it seems to me it's the same thing, right?
It's very different. The difference is if the admins has allowed people to use 1.12 features like changing the validator URL. That means that, and basically the upgrade completes, so we mark it as complete. Then it's frozen. It means that people started to use. We can also detect, I mean, if we find any, but it's very difficult to detect features from the new version because some of them are hidden in fields.
So you're thinking that it's okay that we continue to say, okay, go ahead and to upgrade and do the downgrade, use the install command.
Let's call it rollback. I mean, we should update the docs to say it's a rollback. We should clarify that rollback it's only should happen, you start an upgrade to next version, and then if you find something wrong, you roll back. It's not that it supports a feature to move from 1.12 to 1.11.
Okay, Eric.
All right, so the way the docs are right now, right, we have two docs. We have an in place and a canary. The in place, which is the upgrade and downgrade, does call out that we recommend using canary, which is has the rollback on it. So my first thought quickly is that we could update the in place to add something that we discourage the downgrade. We are already encouraging them to use canary, which gives them the ability to do the rollback, is my thought. And I'll turn it over to John.
Yeah, I think in-place downgrade or rollback, whatever you want to call it, is a very bad idea. And also the doc is wrong. That's not a supported way to roll back that's ever been designed by the Istio part of the project rather than the docs part. We've always expected the control plane to be equal or newer to the proxies, but the rollback doc is not maintaining that. So it's almost guaranteed to not work.
You're saying the downgrade is guaranteed to not work?
The in-place downgrade is, the in-place downgrade will not work. Or in-place rollback, it's the same thing.
With Canary as well, it's guaranteed to not work. I mean, any downgrade between minor version is guaranteed to break something if people started to use it. So if I start using a feature from 1.12 that only exists in 1.12 and you downgrade to 1.11, is guaranteed that it will break. It will not work because.
But for in-place, even if you do a rollback where you haven't started using the new features, it'll still break.
No, if you start to use new features, so that's the difference between upgrade and rollback.
Right. I'm saying so everything's broken for downgrade.
Yes.
Or a rollback, it's broken if you do in-place, but works if you do canary.
So what's the reason for rollback break in place?
because it downgrades the control plane first, and the proxies are newer, and we don't. Support
Yeah,
that.
you have a downtime, but eventually it recovers. So if you do an in-place upgrade, you expect some downtime. That's kind of part of the contract. In-place upgrade doesn't guarantee that you don't have some downtime, and then you can roll back, and you may have another downtime, but at the end you are in a stable situation. So you
Okay,
can
and
roll back.
also I guess I can roll back the proxy first and then the control plane. If I do that,
you could, but it's not what the doc says to do. And
oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense.
But the TLDR here is the difference between rollback and downgrade. That's the important one.
Right, Constant. It's okay. I mean, however we define rollback or downgrade, users cannot tell the difference, and they follow the document, they run into trouble. So that's what I'm trying to address here. So if we have a clear passage, okay, don't ever do downgrade. Don't ever try to, say, okay, you already move up to 1.12. Now you suddenly says, crap, something is not working. Let me just go back. Our document says, okay, now go ahead, do this, but they will be in a worse place if they try those.
Completely agree. But we need to clarify in the docs that there is a safe process to do upgrades that involve some rollback, some possibility of rollback. But there is a point where rollback becomes impossible, or moving back becomes impossible. And that point is when the validator is pointing a new version and the users are allowed to use the new features.
Right. It is okay that I create something that asks you to make some changes so we can fix this doc issue at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be great if we can just submit a doc PR.
Right. Because I found a lot of those issues all related to, okay, I did an upgrade, broke. Too many webhooks, right? Okay, so, okay, all right. I think we have a conclusion here. Now, the next one was the environment working group asked me to report back on this particular issue that, see, this is also related to the upgrade. The problem is that when user have something running for a while, then they do upgrade, start at 1.12, and then we actually check if the webhooks actually, if the system has duplicate webhooks in terms of the namespace and the object selector. And obviously, when we check that, if that check fails, and the process fail, right? So that's really the cause. But this kind of problem was not really that obvious if you use the iSteel operator, because the error actually is part of the operator log. When you run a command and say, okay, go ahead, upgrade my operator to the newer version, from the console, everything's great. There's nothing wrong, but actually your stuff will not be upgraded because the operator actually fails. They find, okay, you have a duplicate webhooks. So this is really the cause, but we have actually quite a few issues because of that. So what I was thinking is that should we make some changes to iSteel Cuddle and check those webhooks first before we install, let's say, another instance, or even upgrade the current instance of those webhooks.
That would be useful, but Istio is not the only way to go about doing this upgrade. We would need to make sure the operator as well as Helm covers that.
That's right, Rich. I know. So you talk about, yeah, make this matter worse actually is what I find user basically when they install when they did upgrade, they actually use the generated, either use the Helm or other ways, generated the YAML file to do the upgrade. So they didn't use operator or use the iSteel Cuddle. So they just, okay, I did this last time, now let me change this version number of the image, now apply this YAML, then hope things go, but things doesn't go as expected. So what do you guys think about that? So this issue has not been closed. It is open for a long time.
The root cause here is that we sufficiently changed the webhook such that it's no longer considered a duplicate, so they sit side by side. Is that right?
Now, in the system, they just have webhooks, multiple webhooks, which have same namespace and object selector. So that's, according to the webhook analyzer, considered to be an overlap. So this happens actually even today. Let's say you have multiple instances of ISTIL installed. That will happen. Hey, John, go ahead.
Isn't this kind of a bug in how we apply config? Like the problem is that we're merging the old version and the new version config when really the new version should overwrite the old config, right?
Actually, when you use ISTIL install, when you install multiple instances, we actually purposely create multiple webhooks. The selector, the same.
Yeah, my understanding was that in the old version, there was one webhook config with one webhook. And in the new version, there's one webhook config with 4 webhooks. And what was happening for these users was they install version A and then version B. And then they end up with one webhook config with 5 webhooks, right? They're merged, but shouldn't it be overwriting it?
Yeah, we should, but that's not the only issue though. The issue, let's say I install multiple instances, I still D.
Oh, well then they're just, they can't do that. That's an expected failure, right?
But we allowed user to do that. And user has no option.
If you have multiple instances, you need to have them revisions, right? Otherwise, what does it even mean to have multiple instances? They share the same resource names.
Yeah.
Unless they're in different namespaces, which I don't think we support. So.
Oh, even in different namespace, because the webhook is
right. That's what I mean. We don't support.
No, but what John was saying is that the correct install and what at least the normal helm and this you have to install that. As far as I know, is that you have to have a ref, and the webhooks are selecting one is a ref, so you cannot really end up in the situation with a normal install. As far as I know, operator may have some bugs that which we fix, but that's the intended behavior. No.
I didn't get what you said, Constant.
So normally the expected behavior is that when you install a revision, all the resources are revision. The webhook has a revision in the name, and it's only selecting namespaces with that revision. So revision is always part of the selection. So you cannot have 2 installs that select the same thing because the ref is the same. It's different.
So how do we address this issue then?
My understanding was that they're not using revisions. They're just trying to upgrade. And the problem is that it's merged.
Yeah. And the solution is to use revision. The solution that's, and then the default tag and the, the proper install process. What other options do we have? I mean, that's how it's designed to work. That's how we test. What can we do? I mean, we cannot change things that are, if they're doing something wrong, we cannot support it because it's not. We know it cannot work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me try just upgrade and see if the webhooks actually correctly merged. If isn't, then we fix that.
Try to do it with revision. Try to do a proper install, upgrade, whatever with revision.
No. I mean revision. That's fine. It's okay. If you didn't do revision, you just trying to have multiple instances. We don't. Okay, sorry. What I'm saying is let's just really make sure that when we do a right upgrade, if the webhook actually correctly merged into, no overlap ones. Let's just try that. I haven't tried that.
And to be clear, you cannot have merging if you have revisions because they're non-overlapping. They are completely different resources. So revision is a big, it's a completely separate webhook, a completely separate label and everything. So you cannot really have this problem.
You're really soft. I can barely hear you.
I was trying to say that if you do a revision, you cannot end in this situation with merging because they are completely separate resources, different name, different selectors, different everything.
Right.
So it's impossible.
For the revision
by
one,
design.
I think you were fine. Right.
And for now revisions, that's life. I mean, we said from the beginning that if you are doing an in-place upgrade, we cannot guarantee that you'll not have downtime. So you can just delete the old one and create a new one. I mean, that's the nature. That's why we spend all the time doing revision upgrade because it's we cannot really solve. I mean, that's why we introduce revisions. That's why Google and everyone is doing revision.
So you want to say to the users, sorry, tough luck, right?
No, not tough luck. That's a design. I mean, that's a trade-off. You want in Google, it's like saying that in Google will stop doing revision upgrades because someone decided that they don't want to use them. That's life. I mean, there is a design that work and a design that has some limitations that cannot be fixed because,
Yeah.
That's how software works.
Right. So how we leave this one open, so we wouldn't address this again.
We should make it clear in the box that revision-based upgrade doesn't have this problem, and in-place upgrade does have this problem and other problems that are known, and we don't have a fix for them, and because the fix is revision-based upgrade.
Okay, right. Yeah.
So that's a proper fix for the bug. The way to fix the bug and the problems is to switch to a revision-based upgrade.
Okay.
Have revision-based upgrades gone beta or GA or stable or whatever we call it?
Our system is the one that is stable is the one that doesn't work, and I guess it's Google, and the replacement is not yet marked as ready.
Okay.
Okay. Right. So the last one is really just a question. For this one, I will add a little bit more to the issue as comment, so the people wouldn't really bother us more. The last one is really the sort of more document as well. Do we have a list of those environment variables that we can set? The user can take a look at it. I haven't found one.
Yeah, John added a comment there that points you to where those environment variables are documented.
Oh, he did.
But
okay.
It's a very delicate issue here because all the environment variables are guaranteed are used for experimental stuff and are not stable, and users should be strongly discouraged to rely on them, except for the experiment. So they should wait for them to become proper APIs or default. So we need to make sure that all the we have proper messaging and proper expectation from users, and not turn environment variables into an API that they expect to work from version to version.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, John, for the link. That's all I got.
All right. See everybody next week.
Thanks.